the April meeting of the Standards Committee, the last one in the municipal year. Very warm welcome to everybody. First of all, do we have any apologies for absence, please, Lenny?
Tom Ward, Chair.
Thank you very much. Given that we have visitors to our committee this morning, I thought it would be a good idea if we first of all introduced ourselves. So I'm going to start off. My name is Louise Fleet and I am the chairperson of the Standards Committee.
If I go next, so good morning everyone. I'm Craig Griffiths, Neath Talbot's Head of Legal and Democratic Services and the Council's Monitoring Officer.
Good morning, everyone. Michael Shaw, Principal Solicitor. I'm Craig's underling.
Sorry. Good morning. I'm Alison Davis and I'm a lay member.
My name's Helen Harry. I'm the Chair of Blaenhonddan Community Council.
My name is Sylvia John, leader of Britain Ferry Town Council.
And then people online, could you please introduce yourselves? So perhaps you could call them in.
Okay, if we start with Carolyn, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah. Good morning. Councillor Carolyn Edwards at Blaengrach Community Council, here on behalf representing One Voice Wales.
And Duncan.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Duncan Lewis, independent lay member.
And Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm a councillor. I represent Gwaunty and Lowbrenham, and I'm here as a councillor.
And Nicola.
Hi, I'm Nicola Evans and I'm Chair at Dyffryn Clydach Community Council.
And last but not least, Bethan.
Hello, I'm Bethan Morris and I'm the Chair of Croynant Community Council.
Great. That's everyone, Chair.
And you were out of the room.
Sorry, Leandra as well.
Hi, I'm Leandra Prescott representing Gwaunty Community Council.
Thank you very much. And to the attendees online, it would be lovely to see your faces. Are you able to turn your cameras on, or are there issues with your broadband if you do that? Right. Yes. Okay. Well, a very warm welcome to attendees from the community councils, which is for the item 4 on the agenda. So we look forward to having that conversation with you after our next item, which is declarations of interest, please. Declarations of interest, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. Item number 9. My wife works for the PSOW, so I'll step out of the meeting at that stage, if I may.
Thank you very much. The next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. So may I have the committee's approval that they are a correct and accurate record of the meeting, please?
Of course, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
I can confirm the minutes are approved, Chair.
Thank you very much. Our next item is attendance of the town and community councils. Thank you very much, as I say, for coming to the meeting this morning. Craig, would you like to introduce the report, please?
Of course, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. So, as we mentioned previously, this is a meeting we've convened ultimately with some chairs, vice chairs, or leaders of town and community councils to discuss the remit of the Neath Talbot Standards Committee and how best then as a committee we can assist town and community councillors in discharging their responsibilities. So, as you have been aware from some of the previous discussions that we've had, one of the responsibilities of the Standards Committee is to look at ways we can help town and community councils and try and promote the values of ethical behaviour behaviours, code of conduct obligations, and all of those different aspects that relate to the ethical role that members have. And over the last couple of years, we've done various different work programmes such as surveys, guidance, notes, and various other little aspects to hopefully try and make life a little bit easier for them. One of the areas, though, we decided to concentrate on for the county borough councillor side of things was trying to dispel the myths of Standards Committee and have an opportunity to hear from members directly as to how they view the Standards Committee, and also then to hear ideas that the Standards Committee could potentially embark on to try and help councillors as part of that ethical behaviour regime that they have to comply with. So what we decided to do is invite Nelson Town and Community Councillors in to have one of those meetings with us and hopefully see if we can pick up some areas that we can help develop as part of our own forward work programme, and to continue looking at ways that ultimately we can promote those behaviours. So we extended the invite to all of the Town and Community Councils in Wales, and our lovely volunteers are here today ultimately to be the first port to have these discussions, Chair. So happy to intervene and give some guidance as we move forward, but hopefully we can use this as an opportunity to hear from some town and community councillors directly.
Thank you very much, Craig. And as Craig mentioned, we have done this internally with our own group leaders and the backbenchers as well. And the unanimous view is that it has been extremely helpful in terms of having that engagement between elected members and the Standards Committee. Both of us do very important roles, and I think it is helping to improve and to raise awareness of people's understanding of what the Standards Committee is here for. And it is all about, as Craig said, ensuring that we uphold the conduct, good behaviour, the ethics, and ensure that people who serve in public life understand the responsibility of it, but also where the Standards Committee can help, because we are here to help. We do have certain roles and responsibilities, but ultimately we are here to help councillors do their role, and that extends to the community councils. So we have 4 of you from quite different community councils, and I'm sure that you experience issues. There may be common issues, or there may be issues which are pertinent to your own community council. But we're here today to talk about the Code of Conduct. You've had the questions that we use as a framework for this discussion. So we won't follow those slavishly. They are there as a guidance, and I say as a framework to prompt discussion. We're not here to discuss individual issues that you may have with your community council. That's for another arena, forum, or outside of this meeting, but it is about collectively what your views are on the Code of Conduct, the standards within that you see on a regular basis. So over to you, please, and please looking to someone to start off and make the first contribution. The first one is always most difficult, but following your comments, I'm sure members of the Standards Committee may well have questions for you, but it'll be good to have a dialogue rather than answering the questions specifically. So who's going to start? So, I mean, let's start with the Code of Conduct. And it's how appropriate you believe the Code of Conduct is, and then perhaps the other issues will follow from that.
Can I ask the question? As you explained, Louise, Code of Conduct is very important. I'd like to acknowledge that and should be followed. But where do we stand when you have a member who actually says to you, I'm not interested in the Code of Conduct? You know, where do you go from there? And, you know, to try and conduct a meeting is very difficult, shall we say.
Okay,
yes, Craig, would you like to?
Absolutely, so I can start on that. I mean, the key point in the first instance, ultimately, that it's important that all members are aware of is that when they sign their declarations of office, they are actually saying categorically at that point they are agreeing ultimately to the code of conduct. So the first part is it's irrespective of whether they agree to aspects of the code of conduct or not, they are signing to say they will be complying with the code of conduct. If they don't comply with the code of conduct, then realistically, or if they're saying that they won't comply to it, they can't actually sign a declaration of office. And where you then have allegations that members are disregarding it or ignoring it or not wanting to take those elements forward, the only forum then ultimately available is to refer that member then ultimately onto the Public Service Ombudsman, because they will have to determine then whether their actions are breaching the code of conduct and are they potentially bringing that council into disrepute in respect of their behavioural issues. So I think it's also important then for members to realise that if they are identifying members who are showing a willful disregard ultimately for any code of conduct matters, it needs to be referred to your clerk, it needs to be referred to the key individual so they can actually take those elements forward with the Ombudsman and make those allegations known, because only they have the power ultimately to investigate, to determine if there are any breaches that are ultimately taking place. But it's important ultimately that that disregard or whatever the case ultimately may be is actually referred then to the appropriate organisations to investigate. But I also think then as well, there's a responsibility on all of us who are part of this civic life in the way in which we work, actually to be promoting the values that are based within those code of conduct rules ultimately as well, and actually showing to members why it's important that we do have these rules, because it's all about putting faith and trust ultimately to the public and that we are there acting in their best interest. And that's what the code of conduct is ultimately there to achieve. When you do have members then who don't want to comply with it or those different aspects, we can't be afraid to call those elements out and to put it then through the appropriate channels for those matters to be considered.
Can I ask one other question? Are there any specific rules and regulations regarding putting things on Facebook? Because this seems to be an issue where things are discussed at a meeting, but if the discussion doesn't go as certain members want, then things are put on Facebook which are sometimes incorrect. It causes animosity towards other members.
I mean, social media is probably one of the most difficult aspects of the code of conduct, and it's something that we've spoken a lot about specifically within this particular forum as well. And we've specifically had a program of work over the last 18 months where we looked at social media and what guidance could ultimately be made available for any members as part of it. But the key point ultimately to remember is the code of conduct obligations don't apply just necessarily in the meeting itself where it takes place. The code of conduct is equally applicable over the issues on social media. And so the obligation to treat others with courtesy and respect, equally attributable on social media. Not bringing the council into disrepute, equally applicable on social media. In the situation that you just mentioned there, for example, if false information is ultimately being posted, then again, that can be a breach of the code of conduct. But the key point ultimately to remember in all of this as well is the code of conduct is there to make sure that members are having the issues in the forefront of their minds when they are considering various different matters. Members also have, though, the important rights of free speech. They are entitled to be able to say certain elements, which can indeed be criticism of decisions ultimately that have been taken or particular actions that have been sort of embarked on in different ways. And what the Ombudsman Office sometimes has the great difficulty of considering is at what point does the level of communication or conduct on social media overrule those rights of free speech that ultimately come with matters. And it's a very fine balancing act, because the right of free speech is something that's so enshrined in the way in which we operate in society. It has to reach a very high threshold ultimately for certain matters to be then considered by the Ombudsman. And from what I've seen on some of the previous cases, they tend to consider matters more, well, threats to individuals, personal attack, personal issues, because it goes over and above that level. And the Ombudsman Office has a test ultimately that they also be considering as well, which they call the thick skin test, where they basically say that any member of the public who puts themselves forward as part of civic life, whether it be a councillor, a senior officer, ultimately in a local authority, they have to demonstrate that there is a degree of thick skin on their part in respect of some of the comments that can be made about them on social media or in different forums. And it's probably the most difficult aspect ultimately for any elected member to potentially realise, is because they never put themselves in that position where they're there to be attacked in that particular forum. But there can be a level of criticism in somewhat directed at them. But the thick skin test is something certainly that we are seeing across the board in a lot of referrals where the Ombudsman decides they're not going to be investigating matters. Because we've also got to remember as well is the Ombudsman have got finite resources. They can't take on every single case ultimately that is referred to them. They have to decide what will be appropriate ultimately to take forward and what's just some issues which are developing ultimately on social media. But it's always difficult. Social media is probably the area at the moment where we're seeing the most complaints in various different forums where things are posted on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever the case may be. But the key point that comes with it is the code of conduct is equally applicable to that behaviour on social media as well.
Thank you, Craig. And I think, Sylvia, your question or your question around when somebody willfully refuses to adhere to the code, I think that highlights the importance of the role of chairs and how critical you are to not just managing the meeting, but managing behaviours as well. And as chairpersons, you are perfectly entitled to bring to the attention of anybody who is not adhering to the code that actually they have signed that on their declaration to uphold the code and to conduct themselves in accordance with that code. The remainder of your committees are adhering by the code, and therefore there should also be perhaps the support for you, the whole committee, that everybody else has signed up to it and is adhering to it. And therefore, if people refuse to, then I would think you're perfectly entitled to say, well, you have signed it. If you are not prepared to adhere to it in the meeting, then please leave the meeting. And I think once you start challenging behaviour like that, people will get the message. I know it's a difficult thing to do because you are dealing with people ultimately, but I think do have the confidence to take that as part of your responsibilities to challenge that. Others should then follow you because you've demonstrated that you are seeing this as a very important issue, not just for the meeting, but for the residents who have elected you as well. And I think that's the message that has to be got across. So, yes. So thank you for raising that, because I think that brings in a lot of elements, different dimensions to the whole aspect of how we uphold the code of conduct. And perhaps also, it also highlights the need for training. We get from the questionnaires, do we not, Craig, that community councils do ask their members to undertake training. They do have training on the code of conduct, but there's also other training available on social media and the toolkit that we've devised, and people can take that away.
Of course. And I think that's a key element that I've picked up on what we've seen from some of the surveys that we've embarked on quite recently as well, is that we're asking, obviously, members of town and community councils who are not remunerated for their roles to have various different training and have to go through many different obligations ultimately as part of their role. And sometimes it has to be a balance between the number of members of training and what they've got to go through, and an overkill ultimately with having too much. But the code of conduct is so intrinsic ultimately to what that behaviour element will be. And I think it's an obligation ultimately for all clerks, all town and community councils to promote that code of conduct training. And we've offered in various different forums. So I know there's been some training provided by One Voice Wales, and they've been heavily used in that sense as part of those, which is a very good training course. I myself have gone out and delivered training ultimately to a number of town and community councils as well in respect to matters, and that offer is always there to be able to promote it. We want to make sure there's as much easy access to code of conduct training as possible, because that is the baseline of which all local government has to function from there. So
if I can just carry on from that, we had a lot of issues with people sort of not wanting to follow the code or just causing trouble within the meetings for trouble's sake, really, and it was very difficult. So for us, the positive part of our start of our journey was when you actually came out as a standards committee and looked at how we ran the meeting. And I think that then, and the report that came back from yourselves highlighted to our members that, oh, actually, this is real and we do have to behave in a certain way, because it was highlighted, which I thought was really good. Because at the beginning of every meeting, I've written just an A4 sheet and I read out the same thing at the beginning. It's number 1 on the agenda. It's about, it's an opening statement from me, and I remind them, a polite reminder of the standing orders that of the council, and it's particularly section 3 and the members code of conduct section 4, and about that we all have equal say in that room. We're all there doing the best we can for our communities for free. And that really helps. You get rolling of eyes and, oh, here she goes again. But then what we did as well, on the back of that, we asked Craig to come out and do some actual training. And that really made a difference. So I'd really encourage, sorry, Craig, overwork for you, but I'd really encourage you to do that, because I think that really hit home with the members that we're not here having a jolly every third Monday or whatever it is. We're actually here to do a very important role. And we've had a lot less issues and people have gelled better. It's a much better council because of it. And tea and coffee at the beginning, that really helps. I know that sounds stupid, but it does. It disarms people somewhat. They chat a bit and people aren't so het up about different issues when they start the meeting. But all of that work for us when the standards was a really positive thing. And it works really well for us.
Good.
I encourage you to ask Craig to come out to do that.
Yeah, good. And that's really good news to hear that actually as coming out, because that's as part of our work programme is to attend meetings, selected at random of community councils. And I think that it's having a beneficial effect is really good for us, because we're learning about what's going on in community councils, but in coming out to the meetings themselves, perhaps it helps to raise or elevate the importance, one, of the standards committee in the role of the elected member arena, but also to see, well, actually, this is how we can help you. And coming back to my point at the very beginning, it is about assisting you to raise standards of conduct and any other matters as well. So I'm glad it had
and I think because
positive impact.
covered so many issues, like social media was in it, and really about what the council is about. I know that sounds silly, but a lot of people don't seem to even realise what our role is and what we can and can't make a difference with. And that was really good, and that really hit home, I think, to people, to understanding not everything is in our remit. We're a community council, and it was really good, and I'd encourage any community council to do it.
You mentioned that you read out something at the start of each meeting, which is clearly having an effect. Are there any other ways in which the other chairs help to raise and promote and maintain codes of conduct?
We have something similar that we'd signed up. I can't remember what it's called, so I'm looking at Sarah to come in to tell me what we signed up to. But we signed up, so we actually read that out at the beginning and under the chair's declarations as well.
Dignity and respect pledge, if that helps. Indeed, it was standards that recommended it.
Good, excellent, yes. I'm conscious that Bethan is online. Bethan, would you like to come into the discussion at all on any matters?
It's very interesting to listen to other people's experiences. I think it's quite good having the code of conduct read out, or parts of it, and the dignity and respect charter read out at the beginning of the meeting. I don't really have a question. My observation would be that people tend to behave relatively well during the actual meeting, but outside of the meeting, there's sometimes issues with conduct of council members, and a bit of blurring of lines between whether they're acting as council members or acting as individuals. Sometimes you call people up on behaviour and they and they sort of say they're acting not as a councillor or something. So that that's where I've sort of had some problems. I don't really have a question to ask her. I'm just sort of reflecting on what everyone else is saying, really.
I think that's absolutely right as well. A lot of people may not necessarily realise when they sign up to become a councillor that it's not just about your behaviour when you're in the meeting and what happens there. You are a councillor 24/7 in different ways, and there will be obligations in respect of the code of conduct that will equally be applicable outside of the council meeting and when you're engaging with the community, when you're at different events, ultimately at that point as well. And I think that's one of the points we've tried to hammer home a little bit in respect of the training, in that it used to be many a year ago probably that people only thought the code of conduct would be when you were face to face in a council meeting. We don't work that way anymore. There's much more visibility when it comes to community engagement. There's much more visibility on social media, and those codes of conduct rules are equally applicable ultimately across the board. And people will have an expectation when they do see you in the community that you are a councillor in that sense as well. And so people will hold you to that higher level of standards in different ways. So it's vitally important that we do try and get that message across ultimately to all members, whether it be town and community council or county borough, that your obligations in respect to the code of conduct don't stop the moment you leave a council meeting. They have to be enshrined in your day-to-day activities in all ways that you embark on things.
Members of the Standards Committee, would you like to ask questions of our attendees? Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. This is really aimed at Sylvia in many ways. I'd like to know how stringent your clerk is in enforcing, when members join Britain Ferry Town Council, the code of conduct. Because we as a council, it's Mr. Shaw here, who interviewed me on the day of our induction, and his first question to me, I'll never forget it, was, what do you understand by code of conduct? And the problem is sometimes I think people can be signing up to things they don't even read the notes of. They don't even read what they're signing up to. And I think you're on a loser from the word go, Sylvia, if that is not that people's understanding, and I think sometimes we need to get to the people possibly who should be saying this to particularly new members of council, that they then work forward with that understanding. Thank you.
I'll answer that. You are right. It is an important issue that you've raised, but sadly, the issue we have within our community council is the fact that one particular member, who was the lady who said she, as far as she was concerned, she wasn't interested in the code of conduct. This was in a particular meeting because she was spoken to about her behaviour. And there is an issue with this councillor and our town clerk. I don't really want to go into detail here because it's in a public forum, but that has caused problems in itself. And now our clerk has been off since Christmas, and we have no idea when he's coming back because his issues are quite serious. We have taken on a deputy clerk, but in fairness to the deputy clerk, she started last September and she was taken on a 6-month trial basis with training from the clerk, the existing clerk. But of course, he's been off since December. So to be fair to her, she's only had 3 months training because he obviously hasn't been there. But she is an excellent deputy, and she is asked, can she attend various courses, which I've said, no, I got no problem with that at all, if it'll enhance you. So at the moment, we are struggling a little bit because of this. Hopefully it will be rectified, Wayne, but how long it's going to take, I don't know. And it's very difficult when you have people who say, I don't want to do any training. And how can you enforce that? That's an issue in itself because they don't seem to think they need it.
Craig, would you like to?
They do.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting element for me. And it's one of the things we have identified from the Standards Committee previously is that sometimes any person who puts themselves forward ultimately to stand for an elected role perhaps needs to have an understanding at an earlier stage in the process what the obligations ultimately are going to be that they will be signing up to at the appropriate time. So one of the things we've identified in our forward work programme is to create a sort of just a basic document ultimately that any person who contacts our elections office who is potentially putting their name forward for an election, they will then be able to get this given to them at this time, which is, it's just going to be a couple of pages saying that these are the obligations you will be under when you become an elected councillor. So they are seeing it at the word go, as opposed to then having been elected and then having to sign things up to say that they will be doing it. So it's about like trying to build code of conduct into a much earlier stage in the process, and people can have aware of some of those obligations as well. And the other aspect we've tried to do over the last couple of years, it has stalled a bit from my end, so I need to get back and revisiting it. We used to have what we called our clerks forum, where I brought some clerks together ultimately to be able to talk about some of these matters, look at ways in which we can work collaboratively to try and get messages across. And if there's new guidance, new procedures coming out, it'll be a way of me trying to flow that information on. So it's definitely back on my to-do list about revisiting those forums and to make sure clerks feel they're not alone in any of these matters, because it can be a challenging and quite an isolating role in different ways. I mean, I'm quite fortunate in the work that I do. I have an entire council I can work with as part of those processes. A clerk is usually the sole person in that council, and trying to find ways to connect people and to make sure that there's everyone out there who understands what the nature of the role is, the challenges it can ultimately bring, and the loneliness that's something I'm very interested in trying to pursue as well. So hopefully that will help make any new individuals who come into the clerking role feel more connected then to that wider community.
And I have also told the deputy clerk, I said, I'm sure Craig won't mind if you're really unsure about something, just email him, and if he can help you, he will, because it is difficult, because this lady is a qualified solicitor, but as she said, she hasn't worked in public service previously, so a lot of this is obviously new to her, you know.
She clearly has the skills which are going to be useful, but that knowledge and yes, liaising with somebody like Craig would be hugely beneficial. So yes, you are available.
Always available at any time. We've had many conversations already. We have so.
Leander.
Yeah, before the meeting, we all said, because we were able to talk, we all experienced similar issues. So that's actually quite nice, the fact that we've come together. But my issue is with or question is regarding the co-option process, because I know it's out there for people to ask questions, but you don't necessarily get a true reflection of that person, or because our meetings are online as well, solely online. Again, it's difficult because you can't have a conversation beforehand or afterwards. And I think everybody's got members that are difficult to manage regarding the code of conduct. And my concern is it's through the co-option process. You get a couple of minutes to ask a couple of questions. And that's really difficult. I've written down the one about the understanding of the code of conduct because that's really useful. So thank you.
Yes, I think meetings online make it even more difficult, don't they, for you as a chairperson to manage, and you know, that cup of tea at the start of a meeting. I mean, it does work, doesn't it, where people can come together and have a chat, and that's missing from that, and so therefore you're losing that connection with people, because it isn't the same seeing people online. You can't interact the same, and yes, it does present its own challenges, doesn't it? Yes, yeah. I mean, you've during the course of the discussion, there's been a few things where we can help you. So the document which Craig has done for prospective councillors, I think would be really helpful for town and community councillors as well, because the principles are absolutely the same. So I think that would be really good, where people get the message straight away that the code of conduct is an essential guide for them, but it's also an essential set of criteria that they must adhere to if they're not to bring the office into disrepute. So we have that. We've got the Clerks Forum again, which is something which Craig will pick up again and get that up and running, because we all need our skills levels topped up, don't we? And issues arise all the time. So having a safe forum like that where issues can be raised, shared and addressed is a very good thing, I think. But from your perspectives, is there any other way where you think the Standards Committee can come and help you? I think you've also mentioned our observations, and we are going to continue to do that, because it's good, I think, for you to have that feedback from an external person not associated with the Community Council coming in with that objective pair of eyes, and can give you, some positive and constructive feedback as well. Is there any other aspects where you think that we could help you? Caroline.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Chair.
Carolyn.
Yes, just a statement really. I don't think public quite understand the co-option role. It's quite formal and has to be done correctly. The advert has to go out, etc. But in our council, we have asked prospective, so I can't get my words out this morning, it's Monday morning, prospective co-optees to do a presentation lasting about 5 minutes. So, you could get a written application and then an oral presentation in the meeting, so you get a better flavour of who the candidate is. And also then the council, if there's more than one applicant, the council then takes a vote on it. So it is, quite a formal procedure, but we found that quite helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Carolyn. So coming back to, what I was saying about how can we help you? Do you have any thoughts or ideas? You may not occur to you now, and if you want to share with them afterwards, that's absolutely fine. But is there anything that's come to mind where we could help you?
The last thing for me, I think, is the training. It's, how much training can we actually bring to them in the meeting? Because we get the same problem, same members that have never been on any training. Although they sign up to say they will do the basics, they don't. And I've often wondered if I could actually bring it to the meeting. I know it then pushes all the business of the meeting all over the place, but it's the only way I've found that we can get some members to do anything at all and to participate, really.
Well, yes, is the answer to that. How you program your meetings, the timings and different elements like that, that's within the gift ultimately of the town and community council themselves. And I've seen that done in a lot of occasions, is that they've invited me, for example, to deliver some training, and I've started an hour before the usual part of the meeting just to try and address that and to be able to do it. But you've got that total flexibility to be able to set the meetings in a schedule that works for you. So you could realistically take the view, well, we will do a half-hour training at the end of every meeting or half an hour before every meeting. You can help try and set that agenda in any way ultimately that you want to do. And it's about trying to make it more convenient and easier for people to feel that they haven't got to take a lot of time out of their own very busy lives ultimately then to try and facilitate this, because it's being provided to them in a very upfront way, and there's a lot of clarity when that takes place. So yeah, I think, trying to work with ultimately members of the town and community council to think, well, what would be a beneficial time for you? Do we do it this way? Do we do a separate session where everyone comes together? You've got the opportunity to be very flexible in that regard, in the way, and you just do what works for you and your own specific town and community council.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. The other thing for me, just to add, is that we're very lucky. We've got an excellent clerk. And so that must be very difficult. And I think the clerk issues you talked about earlier are crucial, because he's absolutely crucial, as is the deputy, to making the council run like it does, with all of us, not just me. But the clerk is crucial.
Yeah, that's what makes it so difficult.
I can imagine it must be.
Yes, you're right. People in those positions, you really see the impact that they make when things are running well, and equally when things aren't going so well. You realise what the contribution is that they make. Any other questions from members of the Standards Committee to our attendees?
More of an observation. Thank you, Chair. I think it's interesting to see that people are getting very similar problems, and I think there's some positives came out as well in relation to setting boundaries pre-meeting. And I think, you know, if you had that format, it may well help at the start of the meeting. At least people know where they are then and where they stand. And if they don't abide to that, at least you can come back to it. I think that's really important message. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Duncan, I think you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's really a question about what steps colleagues take when inappropriate behaviour occurs. How do you record your interactions with other council members who are inappropriate in their behaviour? Picking up on Craig's point that you have the nuclear option of going to the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales. Just so therefore the question is, what steps do you take to record the interactions between yourselves and other council members when you ask them to improve their behaviour?
That's why one of the things that I say at every meeting is that I discuss the standing orders, number 3, A, B, and C specifically, because it specifically talks about that, about that everyone's got the. It might be easier if I read them out. That if members wish to speak, that they raise their hand, and the chair determines the order of speakers. Members shall address the chair, not other members, and shall remain seated when speaking unless requested to stand by the chair. And the ruling of the chair on a point of order or on the admissibility of the personal explanation shall not be further discussed. And whether the chair speaks during a debate, all the members are silent, and the chair is the final ruling. And I remind them of that because sometimes it gets completely unruly otherwise. It did take a couple of months for it to start to settle in. Like I said, after Craig came to do the training, there was a massive shift straight away. I think they got what I was saying. It wasn't just me trying to be difficult. But you do have to be a strong personality, and I'm lucky that I've got a chair that will stand by me as well. But it is hard sometimes with people, particularly when they've been offensive and rude.
Yeah.
But I just keep bringing it back to that. And eventually they get the message, which is sad in this day and age, but it's just the way it is. Oh, and I've got a gavel. I know that sounds stupid, but we did reinstate it because I had to, because the noise was so bad. You couldn't hear anyone. But it works now.
Yes, it works. So if it works, do it. I think, Duncan, have you still got your hand up?
Yeah, sorry. So my question was more implicit, really. In terms of when someone actually, if take an example of the Britain Ferry Town and Community Council, where someone is disruptive or inappropriate in their behaviour, and you speak to them, and that behaviour does not improve, how do you record that evidence so that should you have to go to the Public Service Ombudsman, you have an appropriate audit trail, if you like, of what's been said, who said what, who was present. Is it simply in the recording of the clerk's minutes, or do you record it in some other way?
In the minutes. It's usually recorded in the minutes.
Anybody else? How do you record inappropriate behaviour?
As you said, it's in the minutes, and if we feel it as warranted over and above just being in the minutes, we make it a more formal procedure. We ask people to come in. We have just an informal chat about if there's anything we can help with, why the issue. So that you just got to deal with it head on, otherwise it escalates and it gets out of control. That can take a lot of time and effort, though, particularly if you've got people who are particularly difficult to manage. But the only way you're going to do it is manage it. But again, you need a good clerk. That's why the clerk thing is so important. And we do make it formal, and we have made it formal, and we've had members leave because of various different things. But if you're going to do it, you've got to see it through, and you've got to be consistent. That's really important, that you're consistent across the board with all members. And people understand that eventually.
You know, one of the other matters that just came into my head just now as we were talking about this is whether town and community councils as well could give some consideration to what we call the local resolution process as well. So we've adopted one ultimately from an NPT perspective. So what local resolution is meant to be is, are there ways that you can informally resolve concerns without having to go down the route ultimately of the ombudsman and it escalating in that manner? So it's involved, for example, cases, a panel coming together to see if they can consider a sort of an apology or informal approach to it, whether there's some form of mediation that can help try and resolve those different elements there. So I can gladly circulate a copy of our own local resolution process to all town and community councils, something for you to consider whether that could be a way to help identify any sort of lower levels of behaviour, perhaps where there's been non-compliance, which you can try and resolve amicably, as opposed to it then being massively across the board almost and having to escalate it with the difficulties that ombudsman investigations can ultimately bring. So I'll take that as a ways of action point, Chair, to forward that on.
That sounds an excellent suggestion, because these things, if it all falls on the chairman and the clerk, it is quite onerous, isn't it? And if you're doing it on a regular basis, whereas if you have this panel, that would certainly be there to support you in that. And behaviour is around culture as well, isn't it? And it's what kind of council do you want? Not you personally, but the whole of your council. What kind of council do you want it to be? And so changing behaviour and developing that culture in the right way is everybody's responsibility, isn't it? And it is about being consistent. It is about everybody being treated the same and having very clear policies and procedures in place. You can always revert back to them, so there's no issue around somebody being treated differently. It is about, well, this is our standards, this is how we work collectively, and nobody putting up with it, and everybody exerting that peer pressure within the committee as well. So it's about the other members not leaving it solely to the chairperson, because that's a very lonely place to be, isn't it? Yes. Are there any more questions, observations, or comments that people would like to make? Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. And it picks up on your point. At what point do colleagues feel that boundaries have been overstepped? And if it's constantly recorded in minutes that people's behaviour is inappropriate, at what point do you then say enough is enough, we need to do something about this? Because you can record in the minutes ad infinitum, but if you don't take action, ultimately the behaviour never gets addressed. So my question really is, what is your cutoff point before you actually take action?
For me, it's about using your collective judgment. I think the councillors themselves will quite clearly tell you when they feel something's been overstepped. And it's about collectively we've all got the same vote. Doesn't matter whether you're the chair or not. I think it's about being really important that the council, as you said earlier, Chair, that the council collectively takes responsibility about behaviour that they will and will not accept within that meeting time. Whether that's to do with diversity, race, gender, whatever. And we've had them all at different times. But it is about being collectively responsible for it. And it's not just about writing it down, you have to follow it through. And I think what Craig said earlier about the resolution at a lower level, you should always do that if you can. And very often that will solve things. Sometimes people just had a bad day and they've come to the meeting on top of a really bad day. It's got nothing to do with anyone within the meeting, and a lot of the time it does. Other times people just have very different political ideas. And it's about reminding them that's not what we're here for today. It's not what we do here. That's who we are, but that's not what we are doing here. It's back to about the code of conduct, about what the council's role is. Sometimes it's just having the chat. Because I think we sometimes don't do that often enough.
Yeah, thank you for that. You're absolutely right. Ultimately, people are people, aren't they? We're human beings. And it is possible just to have a moment where it actually is untypical behaviour. And I suppose where it is typical behaviour, then you need to be a bit more firm. But that's informal conversation and trying to tease out, well, what's the reason for this often works. And it is about appreciating that people do bring different views and to the table, don't they? And having a voice, but it has to be done within those boundaries and parameters. Bethan, I think you have your hand up.
Thank you. I was going to say that I also think the context is important because I think I would think you might tolerate might be the wrong word, but you might accept different levels of behavior. If somebody is doing it because they feel passionately and strongly about the topic that you're discussing, like if it's a particularly important issue to them that you're discussing, that's what people are getting worked up about. That's quite different to some people are disruptive and difficult sort of for the sake of it, for want of a better phrase. I'm simplifying it a bit to get it out more quickly, sorry. But you know, like there is a difference between getting heated because you are passionate about what it is you're debating and then just wanting to exert your control over the conversation, sort of thing. So and I think that ties into what you were just saying then about having a conversation around it. And I don't have a hard and fast sort of answer for. I don't know if it's written down anywhere constitutionally about how many times you should give a warning to people. But I think if you've given, if you get to the point where you feel it's appropriate to say, that behaviour is unacceptable, and I'm warning you in front of everyone that behaviour is unacceptable, I think the very next time that behaviour comes up in that meeting, that's definitely a reason to call the meeting to an end and ask that person to leave. Personally, I think everyone's an adult there. If you've given them a clear signal that's not to be tolerated, as somebody said just then, you do need to follow that up. But I don't know if there's a formal process for how many times you give a warning flag like that. But like I said, again, sorry to repeat my point, but I feel like there's an important distinction between feeling passionate about an important point that you're debating versus just wanting to grab a bit of airtime for yourself and make things a bit interesting in inverted commas.
I think that's an excellent point, Bethan, and well made. There is a difference, isn't there? And one expects enthusiasm, passion around debates. That's that is part of the role. Is when it veers into disrespect for others and the behaviour which we would not wish to be. It is about how we would wish to be treated ourselves, isn't it? And once it veers into that territory, that's where people need to be reminded that actually we do have standards to adhere to. Otherwise, you are bringing the role into disrepute. And it is about that. It is about the role and the office and about that public perception. If there are no more questions or observations, I'll bring this to a conclusion. Is there somebody? Leandra, yes.
I was just supposed to ask one more question. I know there's the code of conduct, but is it worth ever looking at writing a separate policy about what's expected? I know it's sort of it's there, but not everybody always understands the code of conduct. So thank you.
Absolutely. So the Code of Conduct is a document that ultimately has been created by law, effectively, is what the key obligations are, which then enable you to ensure that you are embarking on what are called the Nolan principles, which are the civil functions of anyone in public life. So the Code of Conduct are meant to be the principles that allow you to enable you to comply with the Nolan principles. However, any sort of individual guidance, ultimately, that you want to provide individual councillors from town and community councils, that's absolutely fine as well. But hopefully a lot of that work may have actually been done for you, because the Public Service Ombudsman, for example, produces a very good guidance note specifically for town and community councillors, which gives very practical examples, and it goes through each of the individual aspects of the codes. And I always encourage members to have a look at that, because it is a very, very useful document. And then there's different things then that ultimately supplement it. So like we mentioned, we've done something on social media, which we can distribute out in that sense for you. So rather than each individual council going away and writing your own guidance note and writing your own different aspects, use some of those tools which are already there, because hopefully they will do a lot of the job then for you. And I think I've just saved Sarah some time now. She won't have to go drafting anything specifically for your council almost in her role as acting clerk. So but yeah, lots of different guidance notes out there, and I can gladly pinpoint to various different aspects if that's needed as well.
Bethan, yes.
Oh, sorry, I was only going to answer that with just a question for yourselves really on the panel, whether you've considered producing any of the guidance for community councils, such as the code of conduct and things, as easy read documents, just because obviously you have you're trying to reach a broad range of members of the public as councillors, council members and chairpersons, and the average reading age of the British population is actually proven to be around about 11 years old when it comes to putting out documents for sort of digestion, understanding, and sort of incorporation into action. So I think Leandra made a great point there. As it happens, I work as a doctor, and I find it incredibly difficult to read, understand, and use a lot of the things like the code of conduct and things. So that's just me sort of laying myself a bit bare there. So I think an easy read style aged at that sort of average population reading age would be an amazing thing, considering how inclusive our membership of community councils can be.
That's actually a very interesting point, and I've never looked at it from that perspective. So what we've done historically from a standards committee and a council perspective as well is adopt the ombudsman's guidance and all of those different aspects for it. But it's certainly something I can go back and make some representations onto the ombudsman's office about if they can produce a further easy to read guide of some of those documents, and something that I'll take on board then. So when we are preparing our own local documentation in that sense, like the social media one, like we're talking about the guidance for those wishing to stand, that we also produce a much more easy read version of that document as well. So there'll be a wide variety of different tools that could be available ultimately to hopefully try and get that message across. And also thank you for that recommendation. That's very useful to have. Thank you.
Just say as well, Beth, and that's exactly why I just read out sections 4 and 5 of the members' code of conduct. It's only the little bits, but they're the ones that relate specifically to how we treat each other, because people don't read it, they don't understand it. So it's really keep it as simple as possible. It's just a little reminder, that's all.
Thank you very much. Excellent suggestion. So yes, we'll make a note of that too. So if there are no other comments or observations, thank you very much for attending today. It's been really, really helpful. I hope you found it useful, and I hope that you've seen where the Standards Committee, the role that we play, and how we can help you in your roles and support you in the work that community councils do. And I know that we have tended to focus a little bit on the end of the scale where there's poor behaviour, but there's such a lot of good work that goes on within your town and community councils, and you provide an extremely valuable service to the community. You're giving up your time on a regular basis. You're making important decisions. You're spending money wisely for the benefit of the community. So you do a fantastic job. We just need to tidy things up a little bit here and there. But it is important to recognise the contribution that you and your fellow councillors make. So I thank you very much indeed for that. Number of actions that we will take away. I hope this will be the start of a continuing engagement with the community councils at this level. We will continue to come out and do observations in your council meetings from time to time, and continue with that feedback, because we can only improve by coming back to the consistency point and the continuity about having that regular engagement, feedback, and that's where ideas are stimulated and how we can come up with better ways to help you, and vice versa as well. We found it really interesting and informative having you here. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that was an excellent discussion. And yes, lots for us to take away from there. Yes, really, really helpful. So thank you very much for arranging that, Wayne.
Can I just ask a question, probably to Craig? How many others were invited to this meeting and why they did not respond?
So we extended the invite to all 19 town and community councillors, inviting the opportunity for their chairs to attend. the members who responded here, obviously were the ones that got back to me and said they were attend. And I had 2 other responses, unfortunately, from 2 town councils saying that their representatives couldn't attend that particular day, but I didn't hear back then from any of the others.
Hopefully, it's like with lots of things. The start of things maybe is always a bit slow, but perhaps the word will spread that actually this was a really good thing to do. And then when we invite them on the next occasion, we'll have more and different chair people attending.
And I think it's getting the message across about people's concept of the role of Standards Committee, that we're not here to reprimand, but to support. Well, not always.
And that's a very good point, because if we remember when we first had the group leaders, and it was a bit tentative, and oh dear, we only appear in the Standards Committee if something's gone wrong, whereas we want it to be more of a dialogue and how we can help you. So Carolyn.
Thank you, Chair. Just an observation. Our chair works full time, so would probably find it difficult to attend. And our clerk is on holiday, so I don't know if they were any of the 2 that responded to Craig, but I'll pass that message on as well, and hopefully they will attend next time. Thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. And it is a point to be aware of, that actually people also have a day job as well as serving as community councillors. So thank you. Right, our next item is we've done declaration.
Item number 5, Madam.
Item number 5. Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good morning, members. Yes, that was very interesting to hear, because to a certain extent, the report that I'll be presenting will be touching upon the Code of Conduct. So it's interesting to see how these things play out in real life. Well, members, the report before you is at pages 15 to 20 of your pack, and it concerns 2 things. One is the role, the requirement on members to declare interests, but also it addresses the role of the Standards Committee in granting dispensations where that is appropriate to do so to members. So the requirement to declare interests, I think, is familiar to all present, but it does have a regulatory and statutory basis, and that springs from the Local Government Act 2000 and indeed the Model Code of Conduct regulations, from which the references to the Code of Conduct have come today. The Code of Conduct applies to members of principal councils. So Neath, Port Talbot County Borough Council is a principal council, but of course, and it's a pity that the representatives have gone, but it applies equally and has been demonstrated today to apply to community councils, but also co-opted members as well. Putting aside the regulatory side, really, where is this coming from? Well, it is intended to promote transparency, so the public can have confidence that the decisions being taken on their behalf are exercised in the public interest. They spring, of course, Craig talked about the Nolan principles, the 10 principles identified within the Nolan report, and that is where the requirements under the 2000 Act and the Model Code of Conduct have come from. So those principles underpin the Code of Conduct. Coming back to the purpose of the report, or the first part of the purpose of this report, dealing with interests, well, what are they? Well, we know, don't we, from the code that they're split into 2 categories. One is personal interests, and 2 is what I describe as personal and prejudicial. To have a prejudicial interest, you have to have a personal interest to begin with. I'll come to what those mean in a moment, but there is a distinction which is quite purposeful, which is being drawn between personal and prejudicial interests. Where a member declares their personal interest, they can participate in the business before them. Where the member has a personal and prejudicial interest, that then provided all is in order and the member has declared that interest, will mean that they can't take any further part in the business before the authority. The code of conduct, as I say, you've all had access to that, and in fact that is linked within the report. But it's part 3 of the code which deals with interests, and we're reminded from the start of of part 3 that interest should be considered in all matters. So the code is encouraging members to think about interests and have that in the forefront of their minds when they're coming to consider the business before them. Personal interests, and as you will see from part 3, they are purposefully broad. I read that to promote thought amongst members. Do I have an interest in this business before me? Do I need to declare it? So those personal interests are quite broad, but boiling them down, perhaps they relate in the members' case to matters of employment, share interests, memberships of associations, trade unions, etc. So those things which may influence a member's decision. There are 2 branches of personal interests under part 3. The first branch being that the member must have regard to whether they have a personal interest in the business of the authority, if it relates or is likely to relate to a list of categories, but as I say, they crunch down to employment, business, shares, membership, etc. Then the second branch of personal interests is where the decision might impinge not upon the member, but perhaps upon a member or a person with whom the member lives, or a person that the member has a close personal association with. In terms of a person with whom the member lives, well, that probably speaks to itself more, or speaks for itself more than close personal association. It's interesting, the guidance sort of illustrates this with two extremes. A close personal association, I suppose that we immediately think of friends, but it's not just friends. Perhaps we could put friends at one end of the spectrum. Our implacable enemies could be the other end of that spectrum, so it's anywhere falling between those. Provided the member considers whether they have that personal interest, and if they do, that they have declared it, they're able to participate in the business before them. Where there's a personal and prejudicial interest, the matter, as I say, is slightly different. And it's the test that I'll come to, which is prescribed in part 3. And that test says a person will have a personal and prejudicial interest where a member of the public with knowledge of the relevant facts would reasonably regard as so significant, so they would consider that interest so significant that it is likely to prejudice the judgment of the member exercising or participating in that business. It's therefore an objective test, or if you're old-fashioned, perhaps like me, the official bystander test, the gentleman on the Clapham omnibus. Does he, or perhaps she, perhaps I should say, consider that the member has such an interest in the matter that it's going to cloud their judgment? My words, members, but I think that probably captures the test for prejudicial interests. Interestingly, and the code makes clear that it's not for the member to decide that. That is a matter for the official bystander. And if that test becomes engaged, then the member needs to declare it won, but not to participate any further. I think a question coming from that, and certainly questions that have been asked of Craig, probably principally, but of me every so often, is, well, how do I know? Well, you have officers here to advise you upon that. So if you have a set of circumstances before you, you're uncertain, speak either with the monitoring officer, Craig, or myself as the deputy monitoring officer, and we will assist you with advice in that respect. So, members, declarations of interest. Personal are quite manageable, provided they are declared. Personal and prejudicial, however, could potentially have effect upon the business that the authority undertakes. If there were a majority of members declaring personal and prejudicial interests in respect of item of business before the council, that could impede the business of the council. And it is with that in mind that the law recognises that steps can be taken where appropriate. And that's where the role of the Standards Committee kicks in considering applications for dispensations and, where appropriate, granting them. So, faced with the scenario of personal and prejudicial interests which might impede council business or frustrate the administration of the local authority, what, if anything, can be done? There is a system for consideration of dispensations, and those fall under the Grant of Dispensation Regulations 2001. So those set the parameters or the framework within which a standards committee would consider an application for dispensation. So any application would need to accord with those regulations. Subject to those regulations, if an application comes before you, you have a rebuttable presumption in favour of granting the dispensation. However, all applications are considered on a case-by-case basis, and any determination that the Standards Committee makes should not compromise public confidence in local governance. Dispensation can be granted in specific circumstances. And as I say, using the example of business being impeded in the local authority, but also where the interest that the member has is an interest which is common to a significant proportion of the general public. Illustrating the dispensations in terms of examples, I'll come to two pithy examples. Quite frequently, members sit as governors in schools, and the local authority, we know, deal in a lot of local education business. So it is possible that a member may seek a dispensation in respect of being a governor, and that will be considered by the Standards Committee. Also, members frequently sit as members of charitable organisations or local groups. Again, dispensation can be considered in those circumstances. The form that a dispensation can take, it's not a get out of jail card, and forgive the looseness of my language there. It can be limited if the Standards Committee are minded to grant the dispensation, but they consider that the member should only be allowed to speak and not to vote, well, that can be determined where appropriate. Alternatively, of course, the dispensation can be to allow the member to speak and to vote. In a whistle-stop way, members, although I'm conscious I've been speaking for rather a long time. There we are. Would there be any questions, I wonder?
Any questions or observations from members of the committee, please? Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Mike, because that was an extremely useful explanation of the declarations of interest. And I think, you know, as you're going through it, it was going through my mind that actually this is quite a minefield for councillors to actually understand what specifically they need to declare and exactly what it entails. And I think it catches members short on a number of occasions, unwittingly very often. There's not the deliberate attempt to do it, but how important this aspect of the code is. So thank you very much. It's been really, really helpful. Members of the committee, do you have any questions or observations? Okay. No, well, thank you very much indeed, Mike. As I say, that was it's really good to actually drill down into that specific aspect. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you. The next item, item number 6, the group leaders' duties.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is a report then ultimately from myself. So as members will have heard me say on a number of different occasions now, one of the new rules ultimately on standards committees is to ensure leaders of political groups take the steps to promote and maintain high standards of conduct by members in the group. And we need to look at the ways in which ultimately we monitor that as a committee. So what we have agreed previously is that we will have an annual report from group leaders, which will be brought then before the standards committee. And we will also then invite the group leaders to attend a future meeting of standards committee where we can talk about their sort of objectives for the forthcoming year. So before members today are the reports from our 4 group leaders using the template that we agreed at a previous meeting, and ultimately then just before you today for monitoring, I've reviewed them from a monitoring officer perspective and feel that they do meet the requirements, the discharge, the obligations which are on them in the guidance and the legislation now from Welsh Government. But obviously before you today, Chair, for any comments or any queries that members may have, but the intention will be we'll invite them now to the meeting that we have in the early part of the summer to look at any future obligations for the forthcoming year.
Any questions or observations? No? Okay. Yeah. Duncan. Yes, Duncan.
Thank you. I noted the report with interest. Just on the independent members' comments were quite lengthy, but there was no summary account at the end on the number of cases and so on compared to the other leaders' reports. I just wonder whether that was an omission in the documentation or whether it's not been received by Craig and Craig's team.
My apologies, Duncan, it might have just been missed off the page. I have the figures just in front of me now. Sorry, if you just bear with me a moment. I can just confirm what it is. I actually don't think they said anything, but I will just double check that. We had the only one of worth any noting is we had one self-referral to the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales, which was the matter that was considered by the Standards Committee last year in respect of a member. But just to confirm the statistics in respect of training, again, 18 members of the group, 18 who have attended Code of Conduct training, so 100% return there. We'll just make sure that's noted. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you, Craig. And just one other observation. It's in the same report, actually. It's on page 9. Towards the bottom of the report, the penultimate paragraph, the commentary says some members, it has to be said, are also lazy as not filling in member surveys and not responding to officers of council. I was interested in an observation, really, Craig, from yourself and colleagues as to whether that in itself becomes ultimately, if that is a pattern that's repeated, is that a breach of conduct?
It wouldn't necessarily be a breach of the code of conduct ultimately in that sense, because what I think would be referred to there is if there are matters maybe such as some of the general surveys that we sent out where we get a low return, or perhaps a member has not been able to be contacted on a specific point. I don't think it reaches any sort of major threshold from what I can see, but of course you've got to consider each individual circumstances ultimately that comes before you. So if there was ever a scenario where a member was being asked something and they didn't respond to a council officer, then in certain circumstances, yeah, I suppose it could amount to a breach. So an example of that could be, and there's an obligation in the code of conduct to liaise with the monitoring officer in respect of any investigation. So in that scenario, if I was to make contact and they didn't respond, that could be a breach. But it's not something I could say as a more general position, but we will be looking at it on each individual circumstances if an issue ever arose.
Okay, thanks. And just finally from me, and I'll shut up then. That final paragraph on the page, it says, I will work with officers to address the shortcomings of certain members of my group. I think from my perspective, I'd like to see a timed action plan, what that looks like. I'd like to know what steps you're actually taking, because to say I will work with officers to address the concerns, what does that look like? What's the timeline? Who's responsible? So I think any form of timed action plan is helpful from our perspective to know what steps have actually been taken.
I think on that note, that could actually be a very valid question to put to the members when they appear before you in the summer meeting. So once they've recognised that there's an action on their part that they will be embarking on, what are they doing or what will they be doing ultimately to address that and that's timescale. So absolutely something we can bring forward now ultimately when we have the group leaders appear before you.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you for making that very helpful point, Duncan, because you're absolutely right. It is all very good to hear that something's being done, but actually what and when and how are the critical questions, aren't they? And yes, and it comes back to the responsibility and holding them to account for what is being said will be done. So yes, we look forward to teasing that out with the group leaders on the next occasion. So thank you. Right. Moving on to the next item, observation by the independent members of the Town and Community Council meetings.
Thank you, Chair. So again, this was actually touched on earlier on, actually, when we had the members of the town and community councils here. So it was agreed, obviously, that we would go out and observe some town and community councils, and then the feedback ultimately will be reported back. So included in the document today is an observation ultimately for Britain Ferry Town Council. I do apologise, there is a typo on my part in the report, and that was paragraph 5 when I said members will be pleased to note that no concerns. Obviously, when you look at the actual content of the feedback then as well, there was some concerns ultimately reached because it said that how was the meeting managed, and there were serious concerns around the behaviour of some councillors. Chair had to ask on several occasions for one voice at a time. Voices were raised in disrespect being councillors observed constantly throughout the meeting, requiring intervention by the chair. So obviously quite an interesting point, obviously, in light of some of the town and community council matters that were before us previously. And we've identified different ways that can be addressed to hopefully try and alleviate some of those concerns. But very interesting, ultimately, some of the comments in the report about approach by the leader who apologised for the level of the behaviour at certain aspects of the meeting and the conflict ultimately that was developing in those particular forums. But a copy of this feedback will be shared ultimately with that town council as well, obviously, for them to consider certain aspects as well, Chair.
Yes, for our future visits, because I picked up the agenda was only issued on the day of the meeting, and I think things like that, maybe a small point, but it would be good to have it in advance, more than half a day in advance of the meeting, to be able to read the papers, because if we are to do our job properly and being able to, assimilate information so that we have that in our minds before the meeting, we need more than a day. And of course, it may not be possible to read. So I think when we do attend, that is something that, because the papers must have been issued prior to the day of the meeting for the council members to comply with the regulations. So that was something that I picked up. And just a reminder to us all, and I include myself, so well done, Alison, for you observing that meeting, that this is an ongoing function that we've agreed, and I haven't done my observations either, so I'll pick up on that and make sure that I do a couple during the course of this year. Craig, do we have the timetable of meetings yet, or are they coming to an end? I'm not quite sure how it works.
They will come to an end effectively in the current cycle. So my email will usually go out ultimately to town and community councils towards the middle end of April to get their dates ultimately for the forthcoming year. So usual custom, once I've had that date back, I'll pull it together into a timetable and I'll circulate that to all members to give you the opportunity then to pick and choose whichever date ultimately you might wish to go to.
Excellent. Thank you, Craig. Are there any questions from members? Alison, is there anything that you want to add?
I think, thank you, Chair, just leading on from the town councillors being here and seeing that conflict is there as well, and understanding that, yeah, people can talk about things. They are very passionate about things, but it is sometimes when that boundary is crossed that it can be very disruptive. And I can understand what the councillors were saying in relation to managing those meetings. It can be very, very difficult. And certainly with somebody from the Standards Committee being there, I would have perhaps expected people to behave with a little bit more respect towards each other. Purely my observation.
Remember, sorry, taking the comments from one of the chairpersons, how helpful it was following the meeting and feedback to the council for, I think it was Crynant. Yes, Crynant. Hopefully the feedback which will go from your observation to Britain Ferry Council, they will find equally helpful and help them to address some of the issues. So yes, I think it's
Thank you, Chair, and I'm sure that with extra training as well, that would take that forward, because there were a lot of positives as well. You know, people are passionate about what they do. So although perhaps the report does come across as negative in many ways, you know, that passion is there for what the councillors do as well. So that can't be taken away from them.
Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. I would just make a point that I would probably recommend that someone other than Alison goes back in 6-9 months' time and observes the council to see whether the same sorts of behaviours are prevalent, or whether, you know, matters are more professionally managed and the chair is able to manage the meeting well, information is presented in good time and so forth. That's just my thought, really, that we follow it up at some point in the future.
Yes, very, very good point. It's always good to go back to see what the effect has been, and whether it's somebody different or whether it's Alison or whoever, you know, it could be any of us going to our respective councils. Perhaps the same person going back has benefits in that you'll have seen the before and after, so better able to judge any improvements. So there's pros and cons of both approaches, really. Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. I think Alison makes a good point about expecting behaviour to be different in her presence, but I think she's seen it for what it really was. So it shows us that it was not an exaggeration by any political party, but it was what it was. And when you get to a place where I know some of the individuals personally, and they tell me that they're ill before they go to meetings, I think that's something that concerns me greatly. And I think today's little meeting have helped that person, but I think we need to observe very closely what happens in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, could I just add as well, I think when I went into that meeting and was introduced as somebody from the Standards Committee, I was asked, well, what is the Standards Committee? I didn't know there was one. And I think that's quite shocking as well.
Yes.
Absolutely, and I think that is one of the elements that I sort of took on board when I had that conversation with Alison, is about how do people view the role of the Standards Committee, what promotion are we doing ultimately of that role, and again, hopefully we are moving in a better direction by inviting some of the town and community councillors in today, dispelling those myths. to realise that the Standards Committee is there to assist and to guide and to help is the key element here. So again, I think what I've taken away from that is we probably need to do more of that promotion, obviously in different ways over the course of the next year or so, and actually through the observations, through these meetings, through the guidance elements being presented on behalf of the Standards Committee. We recently had an event with Carolyn, who's our representative on One Voice Wales, where both of us ultimately attended to talk about some of those code of conduct implications there. So I think promoting the Standards Committee is certainly a key element we can look at as the time goes on.
Yes, and perhaps we can sort of pull something together, because it's all about how we do it, but in what ways are we doing it? And often, little and often is really good. So if we have an overview of actually, what are we doing to raise the profile across the community councils, that would be good. And I do like the idea of offering the training as part of the meeting, because you've got a captive audience then. And even if it's just half an hour, perhaps initially, to actually go and talk about what the Standards Committee does and how it can support them, but then also other aspects of the training as well. And that might be sort of an easy, not an easy, but a more straightforward way of getting training across to people. So, Carolyn.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I sit on two councils, as people probably know, Neath and Blaengar, and this particular term is going really quite well. We've got two good clerks, excellent clerks, and everything's going really quite well. But prior to that, there was one of the councils that was particularly toxic, and whatever you did or told or said to some of the members, it wouldn't have got you anywhere at all, because it just sort of went over their heads. And I think, listening to Sylvia this morning, she seems to be trying to cope with that similar behaviour, it's just not on. I mean, it is about respect as well as abiding by the code. So, being there, and it is very difficult to handle. So, but I think it's good that now, we are going out, and also that we are reiterated and reinforcing the fact of the code and standards that are expected of councillors. And I think it's good that we've decided to put that in the pack when people are going for election, because they should then understand it before they actually get elected. So I think that's a good move on our part. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I think it also helps that we do actually have you, Carolyn, on the committee, so you're able to explain to people about standards and the Code of Conduct Standards Committee, and also Sarah, of course, as a clerk. So we do have. I think it's useful that the Standards Committee have got your input and your insight into the issues which community councils face on a regular basis. So thank you very much. Okay. Moving on to the next item, which is members' intimidation and harassment and conduct implications from the members' survey.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is something I was hoping to embark on over the next couple of weeks if Standards Committee are comfortable with the direction of travel. We've been doing a lot of work ultimately within our Democratic Services Committee regarding member harassment, alarm and intimidation to look at the level of support ultimately that the council can provide to members, given sometimes the difficulties they can be facing in different settings, social media being one of the key aspects that ultimately came into consideration there. So this is an ongoing work programme via our Democratic Services Committee. However, what I wanted to look at ultimately now from a standards perspective in respect of some of the conduct related aspects that members could face, with a particular focus this time on the bullying, discrimination, harassment and all of those different aspects. To date, I've never had any complaints ultimately referred to me in respect of this regard, but we're conscious we've never actually surveyed members to specifically ask those questions as well. So it's a way, obviously, of trying to get that information out in a sort of an anonymous forum, ultimately to see if there are any issues then, so we can develop some action plans ultimately to be able to address it. So it's a piece of work ultimately hoping to run in tandem with the work that our Democratic Services Committee are doing. So a copy of the proposed survey which has been created, and it's very much in line with what some other authorities have done in recent times, is included within your papers. And the intention would be that we would issue it on an online survey ultimately to members in the course of the next couple of weeks. And then once we get the information back, I'll bring a report then back to Standards Committee for us to be able to consider what the outcome was and see if there are any issues ultimately to take into account to look at support we can provide. But it's just a sort of fact-finding exercise at this point, just to see if there are any concerns, which, as I mentioned, nothing has been reported to me so far, but it'll be an ideal opportunity just to see if there anything is going on where members felt that they haven't had the opportunity to speak up, and for information for members to come forward, hopefully in an anonymous way, to try and identify any problems.
Thank you, Craig. And I think this will be really interesting to see the outcome, because although you say you haven't had any issues reported, that doesn't mean to say that it doesn't exist, does it? And I think with a survey, people perhaps are more inclined to start recording what has been low level stuff, but actually you get that picture. And that's where things start to escalate, don't they? They start off with very small things. We get used to them. People get used to them, but then they escalate. So it'd be good to see what we capture in that. Yeah, good, excellent. Any comments, observations? Alison.
Yeah, if I could just say, when I was looking at the survey, some of the questions, particularly question 19 and 22, it's got the addition at the end. It says it's a personal issue and want to keep it private. And then it said not anyone's business. I just wondered if not anyone's business was necessary addition there. It sounded a little aggressive to me.
Yes, that's no problem at all. I can take that out. Absolutely fine. No problem at all.
In relation to question 40, just to rank in accordance to importance, maybe from 1 to 5, just to give a little bit of guidance. And I think sometimes that helps in the survey.
Not a problem at all. I'll make sure those are incorporated.
Thank you.
Duncan?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, there's a lot of questions there. I only got the papers this morning. Apologies, I don't know what went wrong, but so I haven't had time to go through it. Craig, when are you intending going live with this survey?
No rush at all, Duncan. So if you've got any questions, you want to come back to me with any comments or suggestions, gratefully received, and pop them through to me whenever you get a chance. I probably won't be sending it out now until probably the end of April.
Okay, and is it a paper-based battery, or the people fill in?
It'll be electronic in that sense. So we issue it via a civic Microsoft Forms in that sense for it. So it just means we can gather the information then in a more convenient way, ultimately take that forward. So it'll be a virtual survey issued to all members.
Okay, and just one other thing, I'll comment directly, Craig, to you on each item if I see issues. But is there a plan to follow up with focus groups? So once you get the data in and you crunch the numbers, to then hold focus groups to perhaps explore in depth some of the issues which are prominent in the data?
I think that was one of the directions of travel. So what I was hoping to do is get the information back in the first instance and bring this ultimately back to the Standards Committee in its rough format initially, for us to have a discussion about the way then ultimately we would look to try and take it forward in different ways. So the focus in the first instance is to get some data, and then we'll develop a program of work ultimately that will sit after it then to try and take these aspects forward. I mean, I'm conscious I'm not predicting what the outcome of this data will be. It would be great to say that obviously there are no issues ultimately that are being reported, but we'll have to wait to see ultimately what that element will be. But that will be something we will develop then as a Standards Committee to be able to address things as to the next stage.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Everyone, no further comments? Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Craig. And if there are any comments, then please do feed them to Craig after the meeting when you've had perhaps some further thoughts. So thank you. Next item is the consultation from the Public Services Ombudsman.
Madam Chair, I'll step out if I may. Thank you.
Just a very short report, ultimately, from this one, Chair. So you recall I brought a report to you earlier on this year, I believe, regarding a consultation that the Public Service Ombudsman was going to be embarking on, regarding to the point, ultimately, when they notify elected members whether a complaint has ultimately been received by them. So we did a response, ultimately, back to the Ombudsman office, realising that there was no right or wrong approach, ultimately, with this, but there were just individual factors, ultimately, that we suggested the Ombudsman's office take into account. We received some notification a few weeks ago that after carefully considering the broad range of views, the PSOW has determined that they will revert to their previous practice and have decided to change their processes from the 1st of April. So councillors who complained about will be notified as soon as reasonably practicable after a complaint is received by the PSOW. So they're not going to wait now to make a determination as to whether it is something they're going to investigate. They will now notify the councillor straight away that a complaint has been received about them. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out now over the course of the next couple of months. And if there's any interesting feedback that comes out of it, I'll bring it back to the Standards Committee, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. And that's interesting to see how they've reverted back, because we had quite a in-depth debate, didn't we, about the pros and cons of both approaches, and we just put forward our views. So yes, they've come to that conclusion, which is yeah, that's now the way forward, isn't it? So yeah, good. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Craig. We'll wait for Mike to come back.
Indeed, thank you again, Chair. So something we've now got a requirement ultimately we do on it from the legal basis is to produce an annual report of all the work that we've considered ultimately within the Standards Committee within the last year. So a copy of that now is before members, ultimately highlighting everything that we've effectively considered over the last year. So quite a lot, actually, when you break it down and you see all the various different reports that have come forward. But the key aspect for me is, as well as looking at the future reports, previous reports, we're also looking at some future priorities for the course for the coming year. So I've included a lot of these aspects which we have touched on today in respect of our work with town and community councils, with group leaders, some case studies, some engagement work ultimately that we're going to be doing. So these are matters now we'll be building into the forward work programme over the course of the year. But of course, it's a flexible forward work programme, so we update it as and when different things come forward, and of course what individual members of the Standards Committee would like to be considering as well. So this report itself, if members are happy with it today, will now be then sent onwards to full council towards the end of the early part of the summer, probably around June-ish time, I would anticipate. And then what we also do is we issue a copy of it to all town and community councils as well. So obviously they can see the work that you have embarked on over the course of the year as well. So hopefully before you today for noting, and then onward distribution to our full council and all members then later on this year, Chair.
Thank you very much, Craig. Any comments or observations, please? No, thank you. Thank you very much, Craig, for crafting this report. I think it is a good read, although as chair, I'm entitled to say that, aren't I? But I think it does seriously reflect the amount of work that the Standards Committee has done, and also how interesting it's been, and really quite diverse within the range of business and responsibilities that we have. So reading it, I think we've done a good year's work, and thank you all very much for your contributions in helping Craig to come to such a positive resume. Thank you. And if anybody does have comments, then please do send them to Craig. Perhaps, Craig, you could send me a Word copy of it. There's a couple of little things that I noted.
Of course, yeah, no problem at all.
Introduce some little changes. Thank you very much. Next item is item number 11, the Corporate Joint Committee Private Sector Advisory Board update.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. So members will be aware that one of my additional roles is I am the monitoring officer for the Corporate Joint Committee, which is a regional body comprising of the local authorities in the region and our national park authorities, with a specific focus of looking at strategic planning, regional transport and economic development. So this is a new organisation that came out of some legislative changes in 2021, and we're still now in the process of building through and developing the programmes of work ultimately into the CJC. But one of the slight differences ultimately with the CJC compared to other authorities is that we have to look at how we are working collaboratively with external organisations and individuals, obviously, to promote the region and to develop some of these new policies that we're creating. So what we've created within the CJC is what we call a private sector advisory board. So they are representatives of private sector industries with the expertise in the areas that the CJC has the responsibility for. So we can use them as an opportunity to test some policies, to hear how matters from a commercial perspective, from a non-public sector basis, and to make sure that the widest range of possible views ultimately can be presented. So when policies, procedures are being developed, we know that they've got the input and impact ultimately from our private sector colleagues as part of that. But irrespective, though, of members of the private sector being involved, there are still our usual Nolan principles and ethical decision-making principles that are clearly embedded in the way in which we require these activities to be embarked on. So over the course of few months, there has been an external call for individuals to be appointed to this private sector advisory board, and we now have a list of individuals who the CJC have appointed, and that's at Appendix A of your papers. However, to make sure then that they are on board and understanding of all of the different conduct obligations and ethical responsibilities that we require our members to be part of, we ask them to sign an advisor agreement, which requires them ultimately to ensure that they are acting with public sector ethics at the forefront in the way in which they are behaving. And also as well, we go through the usual process of asking them for their interest to make sure that they are publicly available, and we can make sure then that any interest are being declared, and where they do have potential interest, as you have heard from Mike's report earlier on, they're not going to be involved in any particular matters concerning them, whether it would be personal or prejudicial. So I just wanted to bring this report ultimately to members today, because we are the Standards Committee for the Corporate Joint Committee, and just for you to be aware of how ethical behaviours are being taken into account in respect of the different aspects of work that the CJC will ultimately be embarking on. And there'll be a future report coming back to you again as we do our annual review of CJC matters in the course of the next couple of Standards Committees, Chair. But happy to take any questions that members may have, but I just wanted to ensure you were cited on these obligations, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. Are there any questions, observations on the report? No? No. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you for that, Craig. And it was, very interesting report to read. I know it's only here for noting, but nevertheless, it's an important aspect of our work, and it was good to have this report before us today. So thank you very much indeed. Next item is the recent Code of Conduct casebook.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. So just an information and report a report for information here. We'd like to bring some of the recent examples that have taken place within the Ombudsman's casebook or the adjudication panel for Wales, and this was a very interesting case. So just before you today for information, it concerned an independent councillor of Bridgend Town Council who was suspended for 6 months in May 2024 after he failed to declare a personal and prejudicial interest in a matter concerning his wife and a fellow town councillor. A suspension was handed down by the Standards Committee, and that decision then was ultimately appealed to the adjudication panel for Wales. What was very interesting, though, ultimately in this case is that the report that was considered by the adjudication panel actually was sort of upheld in some ways, and it was referred then back to the Standards Committee to decide whether they wish to actually impose a different sentence than what they originally included. But the Standards Committee quite clearly exercised their authority here and said, no, we made a decision ultimately that this was it would be. We don't see any new evidence that's ultimately come forward, so we are going to uphold our original determination, which I think is a good example for Standards Committee to show actually we are the ones considering this matter. There wasn't an abusive process. There wasn't additional evidence that was available. We stand by the original determination ultimately that we made. So it's good to see that the Standards Committee felt that they were able to make that determination at a time when they were receiving reports back from them from the adjudication panel. couple of other two interesting reports as well included in the general information in the press at the moment. So not necessarily adjudication panel for Wales or ombudsman, but some things that have been going on. A councillor from Devon has been jailed for a tirade of abuse against a senior council officer, the monitoring officer, actually, in that perspective, where they said the head of legal was corrupt, dishonest, Hitler, and a disgrace to the human race. And that councillor was jailed for 18 weeks as a result of it. So it shows it's not just actually the standards regime you're going to be looking at in different ways. There's actually criminal issues that can come involved as part of some behaviour matters. The other one, which was pointed out to me by Duncan in an email a couple of weeks, a local authority in England is currently considering a row between two councillors in their 70s at a parish council meeting, which ended up in a wrestling match that saw the pair exchange blows, shed blood, and rugby tackle each other. I am very glad to hear we do not have that issue ultimately in Neath Talbot Council. We've not had any rugby tackles yet in any meetings. But again, just some of the matters which are happening around the country at the moment when you look at some of the behavioural issues in respect of members. So just before you there for information, and I'll see if anything more comes of that one before it. But just a highlight of what's going on in the country at the moment in respect of matters. Chair.
Well, thank you, Craig. As always, one can see a little bit of see the funny side of things. It's not really so funny because these issues are always serious, but it does make you realise that actually things can always be worse, and that actually our efforts in ensuring that such actions don't take place here are paying off, aren't they? Not that I'm saying that councillors would do that, but I think, you know, in our efforts to make sure that behaviour is of a good standard, thankfully we've not had to experience something like that. So yes. But also I found the report interesting because from a standards committee point of view, it gives us assurance and confidence that actually in taking our duty seriously, which we do, and in a case like that where, you know, it's there was an investigation into the issue, the standards committee would have taken everything very seriously, considered all the evidence, and also taking into account the, you know, the impact and perceptions and everything, that they made the right decision. But also that's what we're here to do, and I think that's a real vote of assurance in the role and purpose of the standards committee. So yes, good. Thank you very much. Next item, Craig, the forward work programme.
Indeed, just before members for noting, so obviously I put some information on what our next report ultimately will be in July. I'll be populating the forward work programme for the forthcoming year once we get the dates ultimately of the new meetings. When they've agreed with our full council in the next few weeks, I'll get those out to members as soon as possible so you can put the dates into your diary. But once I know those dates, I'll populate then a new forward work programme for us. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, it's flexible. We can update as and when that we need to, depend on any particular matters the members wish to raise, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well, we look forward to an interesting year ahead. Thank you. Yes. Do we have any urgent items?
We don't, Chair.
Thank you very much. And we don't have any items which involve us going into part 2. So I'm going to bring the meeting to conclusion, but before I do, because it is the last meeting of the municipal year, thank you all very much indeed for your hard work during the year, for your contributions at each and every meeting. I think it has been a good year in terms of the work that we've covered, and yes, and hopefully the impact that we've been able to make at the council level and within the community and within town councils. We can all be proud of what we're trying to do. So thank you all very much for your contributions. I am aware that it's Wayne's last meeting on the Standards Committee, because you will be shortly stepping into the role as Mayor of Neath Talbot. So
I say I'm going to miss you all, and I'm going to miss the content of the standards, because I found it fascinating, really interested, and a place of privilege to be here. So thank you, Chair.
well, thank you, Wayne, and I think you're right. It is a privilege, isn't it? Because we are here to uphold something very, very important, and we will miss you for your balance, your perspective, and you're always sensible and always to the point. So thank you very much for your contribution. But on behalf of the Standards Committee, may I wish you well in your role as Mayor. It's a huge honour to become Mayor of the County Borough and a privilege to serve in that role. You're going to do wonderful work for the community and within the community. So
I feel that myself, you know, I'm so privileged, so honoured to be taking up this role. And I think that the Mayor is an ambassador for the county and someone who I trust, we don't always get it right, will uphold high standards of behaviour, both within this chamber and outside. But thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you all very much indeed. And meeting is now concluded. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all. Diolch pawb.
Bye.